The alarm went off at 3:47 in the morning, not because of a fire, but because a 7-year-old girl in room 214 had just stopped breathing for 11 seconds, and the machine that was supposed to catch that moment early had failed to warn anyone until it was almost too late. That girl was Ren Castellan, and the man who built the device that should have saved those 11 seconds was her father, Marcus Castellan, standing outside the hospital doors 2 months earlier with a cardboard box full of prototypes and a rejection letter clutched so tightly in his fist that the paper had begun to tear. If you believe that kindness deserves a second chance, and that the people who get told, no, the loudest are sometimes the ones about to change everything, hit like on this video, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, share this with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Wisdom Story House, because stories like Marcus's are exactly why this channel exists. Marcus Castellan had not always been an inventor. 3 years earlier, he had been an ordinary electrical engineer working night shifts at a factory outside Denver, a widower raising his daughter Ren alone after her mother, Sable, died in a car accident during an ice storm. He remembered the exact moment his life split into a before and an after, standing in a hospital hallway at midnight, watching doctors argue over conflicting readings on outdated monitoring equipment while his wife's condition worsened in the next room. The machines had been slow. The alerts had come late. And by the time anyone reacted, it was already too late to change the outcome. Grief has strange ways of reshaping a person, and for Marcus it reshaped itself into obsession. He began spending his nights, after Ren was asleep, hunched over a desk in their cramped apartment, teaching himself biomedical engineering from library books and free online courses, driven by a single question that wouldn't let him rest. What if a monitor could predict a crisis minutes before it happened, instead of reacting after it already had? For 2 years, he built prototype after prototype in that apartment, using spare parts, second-hand sensors, and code he wrote between double shifts. Ren grew up watching her father solder wires at the kitchen table, handing him tools like a tiny assistant, asking questions no 7-year-old should have to ask, like, "Daddy, will this help kids like the ones at the hospital?" He always told her yes, even on nights when he wasn't sure he believed it himself. Then came the day Ren herself was diagnosed with a congenital heart arrhythmia, a cruel irony that Marcus would later describe as the universe testing whether he actually believed in what he was building. Doctors explained that her condition required constant monitoring, that early detection of irregular episodes could mean the difference between a manageable life and a tragedy. Marcus sat in that sterile office, holding his daughter's small hand, and made a silent promise that the device sitting half-finished in his apartment would not stay half-finished any longer. He named it the Ren Sentinel, after her, engineering it specifically to detect the kind of pre-crisis patterns that standard hospital monitors missed. It used a predictive algorithm he had built from thousands of hours of research, designed to flag dangerous cardiac events 10 to 15 minutes before they escalated, an eternity in medical terms, enough time for a nurse to intervene before a code blew instead of after one. When Marcus finally felt the device was ready, he requested a formal meeting with Ridgeline Memorial Hospital, the same hospital that had cared for Ren, hoping they would consider a pilot trial. He spent his last savings printing professional documentation, building a presentation, and renting a suit that didn't quite fit. He sat across from a review board of 5 people, led by a sharp-eyed hospital administrator named Drive Powell Hensworth, who barely looked up from his tablet during the entire presentation. The rejection came fast and clinical. No peer-reviewed publication, no institutional backing, no formal certification pipeline. "We appreciate your passion, Mr. Castellan," Hensworth said, sliding the folder back across the table without opening it fully, "but we cannot risk patient safety on unproven homemade technology, regardless of the sentiment behind it." The word, homemade, landed like a slap. Marcus walked out of that boardroom in silence, drove home in silence, and sat in his car outside the apartment for 20 minutes before he found the strength to walk inside and pretend to Ren that everything was fine. For weeks afterward, Marcus told himself it was over. He boxed up the prototypes, stuffed the rejection letter into a drawer, and went back to simply being a father who worked night shifts and tucked his daughter in at bedtime. But grief and hope are stubborn things, and one Tuesday afternoon, everything changed in the most unexpected way. Ren had another episode, not fatal, but frightening, her small chest tightening as her heart rhythm spiked erratically during a routine follow-up scan. In the panic of the moment, without thinking, Marcus grabbed the last working Ren Sentinel prototype from his car, still charged from testing it days earlier, and clipped it onto his daughter's wrist right there in the hallway of Ridgeline Memorial. The device buzzed exactly 4 minutes before Ren's monitor in the exam room even registered a change, flashing a predictive alert on Marcus's phone that read, Cardiac irregularity likely within 10 minutes, recommend immediate clinical review. A young cardiologist named Drive, Amara Oduya happened to be walking past, saw the alert on Marcus's phone, and stopped cold. She had spent 3 years frustrated by exactly the kind of reactive monitoring gaps Marcus's device was built to solve. Within minutes, Ren was stabilized before her episode fully escalated, and Dr. Oduya turned to Marcus, not with suspicion, but with something closer to disbelief. Did that device just predict this? She asked, and when Marcus, hands still shaking, explained what it was and who had rejected it months earlier, Drive. Oduya didn't hesitate. She asked to see everything. Word moved through the hospital the way urgent, hopeful things do, quietly at first, then all at once. Dr. Oduya brought 2 of her colleagues to see the data logs from Ren's episode. Then a pediatric surgeon named Drive. Callum Bristow asked for a private demonstration. Then a cardiac unit chief named Drive. Renata Aoyagi asked whether the device could be adapted for post-surgical monitoring, where early warning signs were historically the hardest to catch. Within 2 weeks, 5 different specialists, the very hospital that had dismissed Marcus as an amateur with a homemade device, were independently requesting access to his patent, asking not whether it worked, but how quickly it could be manufactured at scale. Marcus sat in a very different boardroom this time, no longer wearing a suit that didn't fit, but wearing the quiet, exhausted confidence of a man who had simply refused to stop believing in his daughter's heartbeat. Dr. Hensworth, the same administrator who had rejected him months earlier, sat at the far end of the table, unusually quiet, unusually still. When it was his turn to speak, he did something Marcus never expected. He apologized. Not a polished, corporate apology, but a real one, admitting that the board had judged the packaging instead of the substance, that they had mistaken a grieving father's persistence for naivety instead of recognizing it as expertise forged the hard way. He offered Marcus not just a partnership, but a formal position leading the hospital's new predictive monitoring division, with full resources to develop the Ren Sentinel for hospitals nationwide. Marcus didn't cry in that room, though he wanted to. He waited until he picked Ren up from school that afternoon, watching her run toward the car with her backpack bouncing in her heart, finally, steadily, safely, beating in a rhythm no longer measured only in fear. He knelt down before she reached him, hugged her tightly, and whispered that the machine with her name on it was going to help other kids the way it had helped her, and Ren, without fully understanding the magnitude of what had happened, simply smiled and said, "Good. Nobody else should feel scared like that." Before we reach the end of this story, if it's touched your heart even a little, I want to ask you for something small but meaningful. Type the word, believe, in the comments below, right now, before you finish watching. It helps this story reach more people who need a reminder that persistence and love can outlast rejection. Within a year, the Ren Sentinel was adopted in 14 hospitals across 3 states, credited with early detection in dozens of cardiac cases that might otherwise have gone unnoticed until it was too late. Marcus Castellan, once dismissed as a man with a cardboard box and a homemade dream, became the very expert that surgeons across the country sought out, not because a hospital finally gave him permission to matter, but because he never stopped building, even when no one was watching, even when the only person who believed in him completely was a 7-year-old girl who trusted her father to keep his promise. If this story moved you even a little, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Wisdom Story House so you never miss the next story about second chances, quiet courage, and the people who refuse to give up on the ones they love.